Kenya as part of her three-nation tour of Africa aimed at boosting the UK's post-Brexit fortunes. It comes as the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, told a German broadcaster that the bloc must prepare for a no-deal Brexit, despite saying yesterday that the EU was prepared to offer the UK a unique deal. It's also reported that Emmanuel Macron will push EU leaders to make a post-Brexit deal with the UK at a forthcoming meeting. Are you keeping up? The French president apparently is aiming to use an EU summit next month to put pressure on the bloc's leaders to push for a partnership with Britain. Well, the Prime Minister is meeting her Kenyan counterpart, Uhuru Kenyatta, to discuss issues of trade, security and how to overcome corruption. This is part of that official welcome you received about half an hour ago. Mrs May's visit to the Kenyan capital, the first by a UK Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher was there some 3 decades ago. Well, our political correspondent, Lewis Goodall, has the latest from Nairobi.
So the Prime Minister is on the third stage of her three-stage tour of Africa, arriving here in Kenya in the early hours, believe me, I feel it, the early hours of the morning last night. And she's here to basically do much of what she's done throughout the rest of the week, drum up post-Brexit trade, emphasise the fact that Britain is going to be able to chart a new course across the world after Brexit. Of course, the big question is, how important is Kenya in the scheme of things? You can see why she went to Nigeria, you can see why she went to South Africa as well, two biggest economies on the continent by a country mile. Kenya, much more of a middle-sized economy in the grand scheme of things, but nonetheless, Kenya is very, very dependent on British trade and British exports. 80% of their tea is exported to the UK market, around the same proportion of citrus fruit and other agricultural products, so they won't want to see any disruption to post-Brexit trade. They want to ensure that the agreements that they have with the EU, I'm sure, will be replicated in new agreements with the UK once Britain is outside of the EU trading zone. But bear this in mind, we've been talking all week about how relatively little Africa currently contributes to British exports. Kenya is an even tinier slice of that pie. Indeed, all of our exports, the total sum of our exports to Kenya is only about £1 billion. Frankly, it isn't necessarily the case that there are a huge number of our products that they want to buy that's necessarily relevant to our economy. Nigeria was much the same yesterday. Walking around Lagos, you don't really have to go very far to see, although Nigeria is a very, very advanced, is becoming a rapidly developing economy, it's still in many ways very much a developing economy, and lots of the population there living in poverty. It's not necessarily clear that the bulk of what our economy is, i.e. services and pretty advanced technical services at that, there's necessarily a huge market yet in many of these African countries, although that market is certainly getting bigger. But in terms of plugging a shortfall from European trade as a result of perhaps rather more trade which is rather less frictionless than it has been in the past, it's clear it's not going to fill that gap. Bear in mind, the whole of the African continent, it hasn't even got an economy the size of France. So that gives you a sense of the relative proportions, albeit those economies are growing very rapidly. But the Prime Minister will be meeting with President Kenyatta later today. She's also going to go to a UN event, and then later it's going to culminate in a state dinner before flying off. She's not sparing us hacks at all. By the night here in Nairobi, she's going to fly straight home to be back in the UK for the weekend. Bear in mind as well, though, she is not the only particular gamekeeper poaching on this particular game reserve. There are lots and lots of other leaders around the world very interested in Africa, the new scramble for Africa in a way. Angela Merkel is here this very week, also touring many African countries looking for new investment opportunities, and President Kenyatta of Kenya is off to China himself next week as part of a huge Africa-China forum event where they are courting African leaders north, south, east and west. The big question is for the Prime Minister, can Britain play on that top table once we've left the European Union? Some people I've spoken to on this tour think that we can. Many more businesses do think it might be something of an uphill struggle for the UK.
Lewis Goodall there. Well, for a while now, they've been blamed for rising rates of obesity, as well as misbehaviour in classrooms. But now, the sale of energy drinks to children is poised to be banned, at least across England. A public consultation is being launched to decide what age a customer must be, to legally buy the drinks.